Hello, I'm Pam Hoffman, Everyday Spacer.
I'm Jeff Miller, 2049 Outfitters.
At Everyday Spacer, we show regular folks how to personally and directly participate in space exploration, science, and astronomy. We're here on Friday nights at 9 p.m. Pacific Time, 12 midnight Eastern Time, and 6 a.m. on Saturday in Germany. We're broadcasting live from Thousand Oaks, California. Thanks so much for joining us.
Tonight's guest is Joshua Carlson, author of Spacepower Ascendant. We'll be back in 6.8 seconds. Joshua is a space enthusiast. He firmly supports the development of U.S. space power. His book, Spacepower Ascendant, was on the National Security Space Institute's reading list, one of only 6 books to receive the honor. The core of his book is the concept of space development theory. He spent 9 years as a civilian working at the Space and Missile Systems Center on the Los Angeles Air Force Base. His views expressed in the book and here are his own and do not necessarily represent those of the Air Force, the Space Force, and the Department of Defense.
So, Josh, tell us about you, your book, and what you consider space development theory. That's a new term for me. What does that really mean?
Well, thank you. I appreciate being on here very much. Thank you both for having me. And thank you, Michael. So about me. So I think that the bio largely covers that. If it's okay, I'll just dive straight into space development theory. So space development theory is the results of my attempts to systematize, look at space differently, not as it is now, but looking at it as a progression of phases that would lead to what would look like the Expanse or Star Trek, the fully developed space presence. Obviously, we don't have it now for sure, outside maybe Earth's orbits. But in the future, I believe that we will, because to develop space is to develop space power, and to develop space power unlocks the economic, particularly, facets and capabilities of the solar system. And so being able to do that, the nation that can expand is always the nation that dominates in the world system at the time. It's really fascinating. I think it would be a lot of it stemmed from looking at history and what would have happened if Europe had never sailed across the Atlantic in 1492. We don't have to guess. Another nation was also in the middle of potentially expanding and circumnavigating the globe, and they did not. They burned their ships and instead settled inward. That nation was China. In about 1420, they had Admiral Zhang, and they had their own treasure fleet that at least navigated to Africa. They have at least one village in Africa that is largely Chinese, because the Chinese ship wrecked there, and the sailors intermarried with the local tribe.
Oh.
But China turned inward. They didn't expand across the Atlantic or the Pacific. And about, give or take, about 200 years later, the English, who had done that, now were knocking on their doorstep with the resources of the globe behind them. And at the end of the day, a nation that has the economic and military capability will dominate in the world system. I would ascribe to, in international relations theory, that's called a realist theory of international relations. Basically that, not might makes right. It's a little more nuanced than that, but largely that's the most important thing, is having the capability, and particularly the economic capability.
Yeah.
So you mentioned phases. What can you give us kind of a rundown of, kind of in general, what the phases are? This kind of fascinates me. I got your book today. Thanks so much. I sort of thumbed through it and I was like, this looks really deep and really good and very powerful. So really looking forward to reading that. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I love being able to share the ideas, because I think at the very beginning of the book, I'll call attention real quick just to one simple sentence at the beginning of the book. And that is that where there is no vision, the people perish. And therefore, I believe, and it's mentioned several times that throughout the book, how important vision is to everything, but in particular to strategy and to development. And so the phases of space development are 4. There's exploration, expansion. This is going backwards, I realize, because this camera is backwards. You
It's
guys
okay.
can figure it out. 3rd is exploitation. And the 4th, which is conditional, is exclusion. And how do all of these fit together? Well, obviously, when you're going into, so this is looking at a domain. So any domain, a new area, whatever. So the first time you go to Antarctica, this also applies to the first time you're going across the American plains, when you might be a European settler, and it's the first time that you're going to space as any nation, really.
So we're really in the exploration part still. We're in the very beginning, I think, right?
I would argue that we are, yes, still in exploration. We are in expansion in the orbits, bordering on exploitation. I think we might almost be there.
Oh.
But outside the orbits, we don't have anything other than exploration. However, this next
Hi, Dave.
Hi, Dave. In the next decade, I think we will see expansion solidly outside of Earth's orbits because of the strategic competition we find ourselves in.
Okay.
So exploration. So when you're going somewhere, what's there? How do you navigate on it? What resources are there? What difficulties? You have to find these things out to be able to navigate. NASA spent about a decade just figuring out how to even get people into space and get them back safely. The Russians got people into space, and allegedly they also didn't get a lot of people back. And so you have to be very careful about exploration because it's all new. It's the pioneers, ultimately, that are going to go somewhere and come back. Exploration always returns. It's not a permanent presence. But you're going to find out what's there so you know where to put your permanent presence when you do go.
Makes sense. Okay.
And so exploration, that's its job. Expansion begins when you have a permanent presence, whether settlement, fort, whatever form it takes, or permanent presence of forces or national capabilities. So that would be a permanent trading fleet. I would consider that to be an expansion. Obviously, cities, forts, bases, ports, any form of space stations. These are expansion. Permanent satellites.
So we're closing in on that pretty strongly, especially now that China's got space station.
We have the capability. We've had the capability for a while. We just haven't taken the step, I think.
Yeah.
And yes, and I think that the reason I put space development theory together as is that was actually one of the questions I was trying to answer is why haven't we done that? And ultimately it's because of the investment up front is very expensive and the economic driver has not really been there and it's not really been possible. There was an exciting discovery fairly recently that changed a lot of that. And I think that's why you see the space race, the second space race, I would call it, heating up as we do. So expansion is permanent presence. So taking it back real quick to the European and then shifting it forward to space, European Christopher Columbus comes across the Atlantic. Exploration. He now sees what's here and kind of what resources are available, etc. Space and land being a resource. Expansion is when you started having settlements put in the New World, ports, etc. And now you had a base from which to go back to the old world from Europe's perspective. But it was still a net drain on resources, ultimately. All right. That all changes. And in space, that looks like, for instance, we've been to the moon. I'm going to focus a lot on the moon because I consider that highly important. The moon is, we've done exploration. We've put, I believe to this day, the United States is the only person to land a human on the moon and bring them back. China, I know, has landed rovers on the moon. I wouldn't be surprised if Russia had, and I think other nations may have as well at this point. But that is exploration. You kind of know what's there. And there's different levels of exploration. Obviously, you don't go to a spot for the first time. And correct, Dave. And you go there and you instantly explore everything. There's different levels of exploration and of much finer fidelity. Sometimes you have to re-explore if you either get a new sensor or there's something that changes the situation there. Expansion, however, has not happened on the moon yet. Obviously, they do not currently have anyone on the moon
No,
permanently.
not that we
That is
know
going
of.
to change in the next decade. China and Russia. China already proclaimed they were going to have a moon base by 2036. Russia has since signed on as the junior partner to that moon base agreement, and they are already they have a brochure actually advocating for other nations to join them in signing on to this international moon base. Likewise, the United States has also stated that we will have a permanent base there as well under the Artemis project, and
Right.
with the Artemis Accords attempting to get other nations to sign on to that as well.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a lot of people want to spend a lot of money though. I mean, I read something with China and they were talking like in the millions, but this is a much larger, much broader project. I mean, space station itself, 15 countries, billions of dollars, and it's still just a small outpost off world. It's not the moon. Not even
No,
close.
it's not. And like I said, the pooled resources of Russia and China will probably accomplish this. The important thing is also that the space station is prefabbed on Earth, sent piece by piece to orbit, and then assembled in theirs. And the Chinese space station is as well. It's much smaller than the international, but
Right.
both of these were built on Earth, and then each piece had to be sent up and then assembled in orbit. That's not how we're going to build the moon base.
No.
The moon base, China's already investing and developing additive manufacturing, better known as 3D printing technology in microgravity, specifically using the regolith. And so you don't send the moon base, you send the machine to build the moon base. The moon provides the resources to build it itself.
Yeah, just like the pioneers, they brought their tools. They didn't bring their buildings. Anyway, yeah, David had another one. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. David, Christina, Cliff, and Michael. Really appreciate you being here and love your questions, as always. Which is, okay, we're engaged in a space race with China, but we don't even know we are. So let's see.
So the latest question is, sure, it's a big solar system. You're right.
Lots of room.
However, let me put it to you this way. America is a big continent. There's also about, off the top of my head, I'd say maybe like 5 or 6 strategic locations. For instance, West Point, the New Orleans area, right around the fords of the Mississippi, Fort Champlain, a couple of others, that if you hold those are pretty significant strategic locations, which is why you explore in the first place. You find out where the strategic locations for attack or defense and the resource nodes are. Obviously, resource nodes are dependent on what the societies themselves desire. If they'd found oil, for instance, might not have been a particularly valuable resource in 1600.
Right.
It's a very valuable resource in 2000. For instance,
right.
Lithium would have been virtually worthless, most likely, to anyone in 1400. Hugely valuable today. So resources can change. Going back to the phases real quick. So we have expansion on the moon. That's a very good question. Not necessarily, but I do consider them linked. Having resources gives you economic and trade. That's not quite the right term for it, but trade dominance. If I have something that you need to kind of play nice with me. A great example of this would be Australia in the last year and a half.
Which is where David's from.
Oh, perfect.
David and Cliff are in Australia.
Yeah, so very interesting analysis I saw recently of China's power grid. They were having brownouts, pretty significant ones in the last couple of months. Comes to find out, they were not particularly happy with Australia last year, if I remember correctly, fall or winter. and they banned the import of Australian coal. Well, that's unfortunate because obviously Australia sold lots of coal to China, and so it hurt the Australian economy, I'm sure.
It's a big deal in China, right? The coal.
It would, yes. But why is China having their brownouts? Oh, there's an interesting tidbit. First of all, a lot of the other places that China would usually get coal are being hit by tropical storms, or like Mongolia, they just can't keep up with demand. Also, there's different tiers of coal based on age. Australian coal is some of the oldest, so it burns very cleanly, very well. A lot of the power plants apparently on the coast of China were retrofitted to burn Australian coal specifically because it could really benefit from that high efficiency burn. Well, you lose that, and now you're trying to burn with less efficient. That's a problem. There's a second problem. The Chinese economy is a mixture of communism, socialism, however you want to say it, and capitalism. So the prices of electricity are set by the government. The cost of coal, I agree, David. I think that's a good call, honestly. The price of coal is set by the market. There is a lot of demand for coal at the moment, so coal prices go up. Electricity prices, the sale price stays the same. Which means that for every megawatt you produce and sell, you have to burn this much coal. Which means every megawatt you produce, you lose money because you're having to expend something you spent $10 per megawatt, and you're only making $8 per megawatt, or whatever
Not sustainable.
That's not sustainable. One of the theories I've heard is China is having brownouts because the power plants are intentionally cutting power production so they don't go bankrupt.
Oh, wow.
Because that's what will happen if they just crank it, and if they even have the coal to burn. If they just burn it all, then they're also going to lose money on every single ounce they burn.
Yeah.
So,
how did you get involved with all this? This sounds like a really deep and complex issue. I mean, what got you started doing all this?
So we'll come back to space development theory. I think that's a question worth answering. So is that level?
Be prepared, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm also getting a question.
Yeah.
So based on my estimate, I think that there is a very strong taboo in space against weaponization in general, militarization in general.
Yeah.
And in particular, we are a signatory to the Outer Space Treaty, and that does specifically limit no WMDs in space, basically, period. Right. So a hydrogen bomb in orbit, not going to happen.
Well,
not without significant change.
From what I've heard, a nuclear weapon in space isn't as effective as throwing rocks at people if you throw them fast enough.
Yes, in space.
I mean, range. Basically cubed root of the energy going out in a sphere versus directing it.
So you're getting like 6 steps down. I actually talk about it later on in my book. I look toward the future, and I basically say, like, look, if you have the space industrial capability to build a space cruiser sort of vessel, which once you have space industrial capability and a space industry to fuel it, I don't see why not. Every tactical and strategic advantage almost accrues to that space cruiser, which means if that space cruiser decides to attack something on Earth is not well positioned to defend itself. Obviously, you have a lot of scale questions. But yeah, to be very clear, you wouldn't be firing though into space. If you have a nuclear weapon in orbit, you just drop that EMP over another nation and their nation goes black. That is arguably one of the greatest fears, I would argue, in space weaponization, which is why they specifically don't want WMDs in space. That is a very, very bad day if that ever happens.
We got some more questions. David had one too.
Okay. Well, they work. You just have to be really close, and other things work better.
Oh, Space Force. Love
Man.
that.
Okay. I'm sorry. Let me finish real quick how I got into this.
Sure,
and then
sure,
I'll
yeah.
answer the questions. I love the fact I'm getting questions this quickly.
Oh,
so
yeah.
how did I
Thank
get
you,
into
David.
this?
Thank
So
you.
as I started looking, I looked at space development first. How would I like take a really crazy step back and look at the systemization of this? Then the next question I asked myself is China's build as a major threat to the United States. Why is that the case? Usually what gets pointed at least 2 or 3 years ago, was the ASAT test in 2007, which China exploded one of their defunct satellites and instantly doubled the amount of debris in orbit.
Right.
And that was a pretty major declaration by China, at least a lot of people perceived it that way, that China is declaring themselves to be a world power. But I didn't consider that a particularly compelling argument. There's lots of nations that have ASATs. We don't consider them threats, strategic threats in space in the same way that we seem to consider China. And so I had a great meeting with Dr. Namrata Goswami. She's a Minerva grant. She spent time in China studying their space program, talking to some of the leaders in their space program.
Wow.
I might be a little loose, but she did a lot of work on that in particular, and studied their program, and then testified before Congress, I believe in 2017, on the development of the Chinese space program. So I got a chance to sit down with her for like 3 hours and discuss the Chinese space program, and that was really the combination of space development theory and then what are the Chinese doing? Oh, this is what they're doing, and this is why we need to be worried about it. And putting it in that context, that's really the two parts that fuse together to make my book, Spacepower Ascendant.
Well, I really can't wait to read it now. That's fascinating.
And then since then, obviously, I would consider this an area that is always worth further study. And so I've been keeping abreast of Chinese developments because I both consider it the test of our generation, the existential threat to continued American prosperity. And I want to see how accurate my predictions were in the book, because I make several predictions about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it.
Yeah, I've been very
so far,
surprised.
I've been pretty accurate.
I've been very surprised that there isn't a, quote, space race happening because China's doing all this stuff. And I was kind of wondering, but yeah, I've seen, like what you were saying, it's kind of an invisible space race. Or maybe I thought was the commercial was kind of taking over now, but
so yes. And in particular, I think the first space race was a space race of exploration. This one is going to be expansion and exploitation.
Got it. Okay.
Because we're gonna put the first woman on the moon. We're gonna send satellites to do this.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Okay. For more questions.
That's not gonna win us this space race. China doesn't care either.
Yeah.
No, they don't.
Okay, so
let's
we started with that, which you saw. Then and also
EMP was what I was referring to.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And you're in space. Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't work in
space. Get it down into the atmosphere, and suddenly it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spaceballs, which David.
Thank you, David.
And then here, quoting Spacepower Ascendant is essential to providing support to terrestrial warfighters.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I don't, that does actually not look like something I would say.
Oh, interesting. Where'd you get that, David? You got to tell us.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I might have said it, but if I was being very imprecise. Because that's not what I believe. As
well,
a
and
matter
things
of fact,
change.
Every chance I get to talk to a Guardian, a member of the Space Force, I always make sure to mention, like, look, you guys need to be looking higher than support to the terrestrial warfighter. That's an important mission, but a service needs to have a mission that is bigger than supporting other services.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. China's still a developing nation? Yeah, I don't know.
It depends on how you determine developing. I would say
Yeah.
that yes, there is an element of that they are still developing, but they also are stealing technology wholesale.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And what is a developing nation? Does the whole nation have to be developed? I would argue their seaboard, the economic and, by the way, Han majority areas are pretty well developed. About as modern as any spot you could get in just about anywhere in the world. The interior, the minority areas, no, decidedly not. And both the development and the income areas show that. And so, yes, if you argue they are still developing, vast majority of their landmass is undeveloped, but the centers are, from everything I've heard and seen, pretty well developed. I would not consider that a developing nation.
Yeah, and Hong Kong is back with China, and they're changing things pretty
Yeah,
rapidly.
not by choice.
No, yeah,
And
and
Taiwan also saw so quick story, Hong Kong was turned over, if I remember correctly, 1999. They were supposed to go 40 years or something like that with their system. China was agreeing to that. I might be a little off on the years, but basically for everyone's lifetime. And Hong Kong was like, oh yeah, cool, this sounds good. And Taiwan was like, hey, maybe we should reunify too. That's not a bad idea. And then the Hong Kong protests happened because China completely went back, surprise, surprise, on their agreement and started extraditing people to mainland China from Hong Kong. Not supposed to do that. That kind of destroys their whole legal system, which is what they were they thought they negotiated to keep, until basically everyone there was dead, from the generation that went into it in 1999. Well, Taiwan is not stupid. And so everyone in Taiwan, or not everyone, apparently Taiwan has said, maybe we don't want to reunify. This doesn't look like it's going to go really well for us. And of course, Taiwan is the crown in their jewel, the jewel in their crown. And so they are going to, in my estimation, in my own opinion, I think China will figure out a way, probably within the next 10 years, to either attempt or actually take back Taiwan, whether that's military or political. That's completely open to debate, obviously. Everyone points to it and say, well, they'll have to do it militarily. Not necessarily. If they elect the leaders that are pro reunification by whatever means, at the very least, they will be able to say, yes, we'll reunify. We want Chinese troops to come in and quell the uprising. That will almost certainly occur if they do that. And now it's not China marching across the straits and sailing into the teeth of Taiwan's defenses, which, by the way, we have given them a lot of weapons. It will be the Taiwanese government, with whatever relevancy that is, to saying, yes, we want China. And a lot of the people there, I would believe, probably saying no. But we've strayed a little bit. Was there any other questions that we want to answer here?
David said that he got that quote from an Amazon book review.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think it was a quote from you.
I'm about to say that's
an
not
Amazon book review. Yeah, it's not you.
So can we get
Someone
that one
else
up real quick? Oh,
What's
and
that?
I wondered too. I don't know if I've seen that quote, because that's Amazon.com.au. I assume they're all the same. Spacepower Ascendant is essential to providing support. So how I would interpret that is the theories and thoughts found in Spacepower Ascendant are essential to equipping the Space Force to support the terrestrial warfighter, and then I would put in parentheses with an asterisk, among other missions. Because, as I said, I think I already said once, the support to the terrestrial warfighter is clearly important. It's not the most important mission, in my opinion, for the Space Force. There are lots of missions that the Space Force should have. One of them is support to the warfighter, but expansion and protection is far more important, in my opinion.
Okay, they say they're quoting you. Interesting.
I think yeah.
That's odd.
Of course, you have to find it in the book to be sure.
Yeah, I can go back and look. It's speaking in the third person. I don't think I said that, but if I'm pointed to a page, I could be wrong. But I'm pretty sure I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, if it's in a review, that totally would make sense.
Yeah.
Or in someone could be basically, so interpreting what you said there,
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and calling it a quote.
right. And
Yeah.
Dave's not to worry.
Yeah. One of the questions that I had during this is the exploitation part of it, and we haven't really gotten there yet.
Yeah, I was going to try to get back there, but I wanted to
Right,
answer
yeah.
a couple of questions.
Is the biggest trick to the exploitation is getting the resources back.
Mm.
Because if you just send people out there and they mine stuff and use it out there, how does that benefit me who paid for putting it out there in the first place? That's,
That is a great question. And that is one of the, I would argue that is, especially, so once again, not really looking at the orbits. I think we're already probably in exploitation now with the orbits, considering the proliferation of commercially owned satellites. By the way, SpaceX basically puts up more satellites every year than like the next 3 governments combined.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're in exploitation in orbit. We have reached that point in orbit already.
Okay. Interesting.
And the question I think then is, could you also have exclusion in orbit? I believe that that's also possible, potentially with current technology, based on the space threat report I read, unclassified. I believe it's open source. You can find it online. Basically talking about a lot of nations around the world have space weapons, either space-based or ground-based. And so in theory, you could have exclusion, but exploitation. So the question, I think that that's a great question. And let's go back real quick to our historical comparison of going across the Atlantic. So when you went to the New World, from the European perspective, you had some trade back and forth across. You had, for instance, the fur trade comes to mind immediately. You had the gold that the Spanish were pillaging and shipping back.
Yeah.
But you had a lot of other resources that were being gathered. And what ended up happening was the economic development of the new continent and the massing of people there and a new marketplace, not just the benefit of Europe. I would consider, especially considering the expense of getting resources back to Earth at the moment, that probably will be the case. I see at least 2 possible means of exploitation now on the moon. The first is, and a lot of the studies I've seen look at lunar ice. As a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, there's a university in the Midwest, I don't remember what state it is, actually has a lunar mining program at their university so that they can start exploring what that would actually look like.
Oh, wish I knew, because I'm actually from the Midwest.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think that it makes a lot of sense. Moon ice. So I mentioned at the beginning a bit as a teaser that there really wasn't a space race, in my opinion, not an expansionistic one, up until about 2012 thereabouts, and there was a couple of satellites, and a Indian one and then a United States one confirmed it. That there is significant deposits of ice on the moon, which is the first time that we had been able to confirm that. And this moon ice is very important because moon ice is, of course, water. Water you can break down to its components, which are oxygen and hydrogen. Oxygen and hydrogen happen to be propellant, which you can then use to fuel and refuel satellites, rockets, everything else. There's obviously a lot of other resources on the moon, but what moon ice is often pointed to as the most important one to start because you can radically lower the operating cost of satellites you can refuel in orbit. They've already tested refueling sats. The problem now is you have to get your fuel from Earth, so it's incredibly expensive to get that fuel off of Earth and refuel a satellite. But if you can do it from the moon, the gravity well starts to work for you, and it's
20 times less expensive. No, it's about 20 times.
Econ major.
Yes.
Yeah, it's about 20 times less expensive to get it to LEO from the moon than it is from the surface of the Earth.
I can believe that.
Yes, and so you refuel satellites, especially big important ones, and you have the beginnings of a economy. The second one, and so I believe that's most people point to that. I consider that one very important. By the way, that's probably why the Chinese and Russians are going to the South Pole, is that's the highest concentration, one of the highest concentrations of lunar ice.
Right.
And then the second one is the other resources. So you have all sorts of other elements that are useful in production on the moon. And let's go back real quick to the additive manufacturing. Once you have additive manufacturing capabilities and the capability to make things, well, when you can make things, you can make more things that make things, so to speak. You can build the 3D printers with your 3D printers.
Right.
And you can increase the amount of production you're able to generate on the moon to make potentially satellite pieces. If you can make satellite pieces, now you can start to assemble satellites, once again, at 1/20th of the cost of getting to LEO out off of Earth. You can send them back to Earth and assemble them there. And now at that point, it starts becoming space-based solar power, hydroponics, all sorts of things. And I think the real game changer is going to be a genuine space-based industrial capability that lets you build much larger ships and space-based solar panel farms, which is, I mean, they're talking like kilometers potentially to be able to build some of these, but generate enough power for like cities.
Couple more questions.
Let's see. First one.
So,
are you talking moon asteroid? And to your knowledge, has anyone or any consortia expressed or finalized arrangements with your government or the UN?
To your knowledge, has anyone or consortia? So Luxembourg, I believe it's Luxembourg, actually has passed laws to enable moon mining.
Yep, and that's where they're going.
Russia has partnered with them to be able to kind of fall under that legal framework.
And I know a couple of organizations here have.
I was saying, I'm pretty sure several organizations in the United States have as well.
Yeah,
it's always pointed out in the Moon Treaty, which apparently we are not a signatory to, that it mentions that you have to, do moon stuff for the good of all mankind. That's pretty squishy. And so it also says you can't, you can't claim national appropriation of moon or any other celestial body, which for all practicality, what that means is you can't go to the moon, plant your flag, and, now the moon is mine. But what that doesn't mean...
Unless you do. Who's going to stop you if you do?
You can try. No one's going to respect that.
Yeah.
But what you can do is, let's say you find 2 or 3 major ice deposits on the South Pole, and you want to control them. Well, let's say you put, let's say they're about 4 miles for my, or 4 kilometers. It doesn't really matter, whatever the particular size is from each other. So you put a base in the middle, and you have rovers that would go out from that to go mine the ice and bring it back and purify it there, create the propellant and store it there. Well, what you would then do is state, hey, everyone within 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers of my base that is now on the South Pole of the moon, no one can come in here, because if you land, you're going to put dust everywhere. We will consider that a hostile action because you're interfering with operations, potentially because this will be a crewed base, you're putting our taikonauts, cosmonauts, astronauts, whoever nation happens to be there, you're putting them at risk. You can't land in this area. Well, what have you done? You've essentially declared that these 5 kilometers are that nation's, because no one else can come in. And so national appropriation is one thing, but securing key nodes through diplomatic and legal means, and possibly with the threat of force backing that up, is entirely, I believe, not only entirely possible, I think almost inevitable, unfortunately, based on history, human's history. And the fact that every environment we have gone to, we have brought ourselves and our ability to be in conflict with each other.
Where the resources are, it's going to be where
space is no different. It's only a matter of time, which means we need to have the proper mindset.
Yeah.
You own part of the moon?
Speaking of property rights, which it doesn't mean anything until you're there.
No.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm not at all surprised that an enterprising young American apparently sold that to you. At least they didn't sell you a bridge. That is proverbial here. But yeah.
What? I think we got another one, right?
Yeah.
Wait. I know. They've got rocks here. It's like they're rocks.
That is one other thing too. Is if you're trying to get resources back to Earth, it is significantly easier to get them from space down to Earth than it is to get it from Earth back to space. So in space, getting the resources down to Earth are significantly easier.
Yeah, all you have to do is like get a whole big mass of iron and railgun it off the moon and toward the Earth.
Yep.
I am aware that's or I have heard that discussed potentially.
Yes.
In theoretical of the theoretical stuff. So
another comment.
I do mean ice. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so exploitation is the tipping point, going back to phases of space development. So expansion to exploitation. The tipping point is economic viability. The minute you are making more money off of this area and the resources and the trade lanes and everything else, then the expansion costs, you are in exploitation. If there is a business case to be made, you're in exploitation. And so that's where I was saying, in orbit, we're in exploitation. We have businesses making money in orbit, positive income flow in orbit, which means we are in exploitation. We're not there yet on the moon, but I think that with the founding of the moon base next decade at the latest, most likely that will change. I would guess somewhere between 2036 and 2045.
Wow.
This decade, I think it's NASA partnered with several commercial entities, and they're putting, I did the count, I want to say it was like 40 commercial pieces of hardware on the moon by the end of this decade. Permanent presence next decade.
40, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I want to say it was the NASA CLEP, something like that, the Industrial Partnership Program, something like that.
No, I don't know.
But there's a whole bunch of stuff going this decade, assuming it gets funded and all of this stuff. I mean, these are all projections.
Cool. Right.
But once exploitation occurs, it is naturally reinforcing. We're not going back to a non-space time in orbit because the exploitation drives the engine on. It is now beneficial. No one will go back. Expansion, you can still shrivel at that point because it might not be economically viable. If you've read Alfred Thayer Mahan, he talks about the need for the Navy does not have a need to exist without the merchant marine. What he's describing basically is that a Navy only has one of two purposes. Either it can be used for aggressive and conquest purposes. Well, three. Aggressive conquest. It can be used simply as a pride. Hey, look at the amazing Navy we have. Or it can be used as a tool to protect the trade of a nation and its allies, the merchant marine. Without the merchant marine, there's no need for the Navy. Basically, if we didn't have the constant trade ships going back and forth across the Atlantic and Pacific, there'd be no need for a Navy, not at least to the scope that we have right now. Likewise, I see the Space Force by about 2050 probably needing to have been developed to roughly that same level of capacity, because once you start having trade ships going back and forth, whether that's what form the resources are, whether that's some form of data that can be potentially pirated, if you can get within those the antenna connections, that there will need to be some form of actual naval-like presence.
Wow.
In space.
Okay. Let's see. Josh, are you in any way confident China would work in concert with the USA to come to a reasonable agreement on the peaceful exploitation, mining, population, etc. of the moon?
I have my opinion, but
I would
go
be
for
very
it, Josh.
surprised.
No. and here's why. There's a bunch behind that. So a great article, and I forgot to grab it beforehand. I'm sorry. A great article though is The Architects of the Soul. It's on Cenophile, I believe, .com. It's actually David would probably like this. It's a former Australian diplomat that was apparently the ambassador to China. And now that he was retired, he decided to basically write the article saying, okay, nobody understands what's going on here. I'll tell you what's going on with China. What are the threads of thought that they deal with? And he basically argues that there are two. That China is of course communist, but he points out not Marxist, not Leninist. Particularly, they are Stalinist. As Mao was coming to power, Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union, and Stalinist thought was at the forefront of Marxist thought. And Stalin, in particular, had an interesting problem to deal with in Russia. So when Marx, of course, was saying the rise of the proletariat, awesome. Lenin said, here we are, we're going to be great. Lenin said, and then by the time they got to Stalin, they were looking around going, this kind of sucks. What happened? And Stalin had to make an argument for what happened. Why was the utopia not achieved? What he came up with is that the reason it's not achieved is the party is not yet pure. We are being undercut by the remnants of capitalism. And so we need to continually purge the party to be able to purify ourselves and achieve the continual struggle. And so that was also why you had all the purges in Russia in the 1930s, coincidentally. Okay. Well, Mao adopted this, and they also have, I mean, you could argue that's why they had the mass starvation or execution, depending on how you look at it, of tens of millions of Chinese during the Great Leap Forward. If Neil Armstrong's one small step for man, one great leap for mankind, I would argue that was probably a great leap back, actually, in a lot of respects. Genocide is usually not a good thing, no matter what it does for a nation. And by the way, I think that gave them a significant issue that they're going to have to deal with here in about 10 years, but I'll get to that in a minute. The second form of thought, though, that they have to deal with is dynastic thinking. Dynastic thinking comes from the Chinese dynastic thinking. Basically, if you're not the best leader and you're not able to keep power and lead China forward, then someone will replace you because someone's going to be willing to take over. But not only will they take you over, they will kill you, they will kill your family, they will kill your friends, they will kill everyone who ever knew you. They will expunge you from all the records, and you will never have existed, which is why it's kind of hard to delve kind of deep into China's history, because the dynastic reality was that they would obliterate the previous dynasty's records. And so why is all this important? It's important because Xi Jinping, like all of the previous premiers, there are multiple factions inside the Chinese government. Zhu Jintao was, I think, the previous one, and then I am blanking on the one before that took over right after the Tiananmen Square massacre. But he, in particular, ruled through a very corrupt fashion. Xi Jinping is not from his faction, but Xi Jinping has to maintain Chinese dominance, appearance of dominance, and shows of Chinese power. The moment he falters, in my estimation, there are multiple people ready to step up and expunge him and everyone else from the records that failed to lead China to this great path. Essentially, you have the problem of China thinks of itself. They have been fed the belief that they are supermen, so to speak, that their place is to rule. And if they do not, if their leaders do not, those leaders, in my estimation, will be replaced. And the leaders that replace them will have a lot of motivation to continue domination and further expansion. For these reasons, I don't think it's possible. They can't settle in and like, oh, cool, United States and us, we'll just kind of get along. I don't think the Chinese public would stand for it, unfortunately.
And a lot of stuff is censored there. They don't have access to other ideas and like the internet. A lot of companies have pulled out of China. They can't even operate there. I think LinkedIn was the most recent ones.
And if our Twitter is an echo chamber, the Chinese Twitter equivalent is even more of an echo chamber. And it's in particular infiltrated with a lot of hyper nationalistic rhetoric. Coincidentally, do you know what the #1 movie in China at the moment is? Arguably the #1 grossing in the history of the world, as a matter of fact.
What?
It is a history of the heroic Chinese struggle against the American invaders in the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir.
Okay. It sounds like Galaxy Quest. The historical documents.
The historical documents. Yeah, I mean, they picked an interesting battle to choose. But, so
is it an actual battle? I don't know that much about
it is. It was a major battle where the Chinese, where we marched very far north, basically had completely overran North Korea. China sent millions south and beat us back to the 38th parallel, and that's where it stabilized. But Chosin Reservoir is legendary. If you ask any Marine, United States Marine, they will, if they don't know Chosin Reservoir, shame on them. It was a major battle that the Marines gave the Chinese a significant bloody nose in that battle, which is why I think it was an interesting battle for them to choose. But in the recent remake of Red Dawn, for instance, first of all, it's a fairly ridiculous movie to begin with. No offense to anyone who happens to like it. But originally it was the USSR was Red Dawn. They were the ones, coming to take over America. In the remake, it's North Korea. I don't care what you think about North Korea's military capabilities. There is no way they are getting to the United States with military forces and landing and taking over. Here's an interesting trivia question. Did you know that wasn't who it was supposed to be?
Oh.
It was supposed to be China. They originally shot it as the Chinese came over and took over. Chinese money got poured into the project, and in post-production, they took them out and put the North Korean flags there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, ultimately,
that's crazy.
Once again, where there is no vision, the people perish. To understand your enemy and understand yourself, as Sun Tzu would say, you have to understand your enemy. And the problem is that a lot of Chinese money is being spent on, in my opinion, information warfare to try to shape the battlefield so we don't view them as a threat. When in reality, based on their own rhetoric, I would assess that they have ramped up their people significantly to consider us the largest threat.
Wow.
And
we have no idea. We have no idea.
I try to keep abreast of this. In particular, in February, I don't know if you were particularly paying attention. This was the Chinese and American tete-a-tete, the first of the new administration's face-to-face diplomatic relations with China. They got together in, I believe, Anchorage, Alaska. And the meeting started off for 10 minutes. The Chinese delegation stood up and berated the Americans, saying that the Americans brought up something about human rights offenses. And the Chinese said, you have no right to talk to us from a position of strength, let alone on human rights offenses. And what's really interesting is obviously here it was like, whoa, okay, that's not exactly, diplomacy by most definitions of it. But what's interesting is in China, there was a very humiliating negotiation imposed on the Chinese, I believe during the Opium War by England. And there was a picture of that with the conquering European colonial powers and the Chinese delegation. And that was on, I think, either top or bottom. The other one was a picture from us talking to them in Alaska, clearly juxtaposing, here was China weak and frail and taken over, and now we've reestablished ourselves with strength, basically, is the juxtaposition of the two.
Wow.
Okay, let's get to some of this stuff that's come up since then.
What
Um,
questions?
David,
Oh yes. Why do you not include Russia? So there's a bunch of handicaps that Russia has. Russia, if you want to think of them, they are if we're running. Remember, we're running a marathon. This is a marathon, space development. And Russia is the dude at the gym that's all jacked and on steroids and never does leg day. So he's got these teeny tiny legs and huge, huge arms that are really imposing. The Russian military, pretty impressive, especially for the economy that they have. Why is that important? Russia's economy is about the size of Texas. I'm not particularly worried about Russia being able to compete with us in space expansion. That's just not. They're not even in our ballpark. We have states, one of 50, that are the size of their economy, and they have significant local threats they have to consider. The continuing conflict in Ukraine, a bunch of others. I saw a really interesting YouTube video about the fact that the Russians are expanding because when they lost all of their various provinces and territories in the USSR, they actually increased the size of their border, and so they are actually in a very vulnerable state from a border perspective. They are in a significantly weakened state, and so that's why they are trying to expand and conquer back. But they are in no position to really focus on space expansion. Whereas obviously the United States, we have Canada to our north, Mexico to our south, and 2 oceans, which are controlled by the most powerful navy in the world, ours. So we can focus a little more on space expansion, as I believe we should.
Yep.
China, on the other hand, has a purchasing power that's already surpassed ours, and their GDP is projected to pass ours this year. Now, there's some interesting videos I was seeing recently about their GDP and the fact that it might not be quite as impressive as it sounds. But nonetheless, I would definitely consider them a much more significant long-term strategic threat than I do Russia. Additionally, Russia is locked in their we build weapons mindset. China, if you read a really interesting book I've been reading recently called Unrestricted Warfare, it's on Amazon. It's by 2 Chinese colonels, written in 1999, and it posits a new form of warfare. One of the really interesting elements of that is that they don't even recommend that we necessarily need to build weapons. In their argument, we've already achieved the most powerful weapon capabilities. We don't really need weapons in the way that we would perceive weapons, but what we can do is weaponize basically everything else. You can weaponize the internet, you can weaponize information, you can weaponize economies, you can weaponize, etc.
Fascinating. And since you showed the other book, we got to show your book.
Oh yes. Yeah, it's a great book. I know the author. He's generally pretty humble.
And I appreciate your note. That was very nice. So let's see. We did have one. Welcome, Kishore. Thanks for joining us. I think you've been here before at least once. Bangalore. Okay, Bangalore. Yeah, great.
Why do sunspots occur?
Yeah, that's
if I remember correctly, it's a hiccup in the nuclear fusion. Or I'm sorry.
Well, some of the matter gets ejected, right? Some of the matter gets ejected, and then it comes back in, and those are the sunspots. Those points.
Yeah, it's actually the magnetic fields of the sun get twisted because of the rotation of the sun, and they get twisted, and where they kind of break the surface, you get the prominences. So,
on a side note, shout out to India. I would consider the emerging space nations. I would consider there's 4 that are in the lead. I would consider that obviously to be the United States, China, Russia, and the EU. Emerging nations, I would point to Brazil and India, in particular, as emerging nations that I think will have a fairly large role to play in the coming expansion. And by the way, and I'm sorry. And also, I would like to note as well, Japan and China, although are they expanding or established? I believe South Korea just established a space command, which is a first for it.
Mm.
And so
Okay.
I believe these nations, we, the United States, are a nation who values our allies, unlike the Chinese, who seem to be great at pissing them off. And so if we can muster allies and expand into space in lockstep with them, I think that honestly this battle is, at the very least, if not won, significantly easier than it
Oh.
would be on our own.
Okay. Interesting.
So
We got some more, right?
yeah. Are you?
Oh, radical. Hmm.
Well,
Are you a radical? I don't think you are.
I don't know.
You're a
Radicals change
realist.
history, so there is that. If
What was
I
that?
was saying what everyone else was saying, I wouldn't be particularly interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm sorry. Could we get the question real quick again?
Sure.
Among
Sure.
your contemporaries, or are they fairly contemporary concerns? I think the question is contemporaries. So I would say, taking a step back, there's really two schools of thought, largely at this point. Well, so there's a spectrum. They break down to three. One is there should be no military anything in space. It should be only exploration and pure exploration, space for scientific, and that's it. Then there's what I would term the brown water school. I've heard other maybe more flattering terms, but brown water is from the naval language. It's focused on the littorals where the water is kicking up the shore, and so it's brown water. And that is in space. The context is that brown water would be focused almost exclusively on support to the warfighter, orbits in space, or orbits around the Earth, military satellites around Earth. That's it. And then there's the blue water school, which focuses more on the deep, getting out beyond the littorals into the deep water, focusing on sea control versus coastal operations, if that makes sense. That's a bit vague, perhaps, but
that makes sense.
Focused much more on the economic expansions in beyond Earth orbits. So looking at the moon, which I've talked about quite a bit. And so going back, so I have to put that framework in because I answer the question. Are my ideologies seen as radical? In the science and space, yes, absolutely, that's radical. The fact that I'm not only proposing that we expand economically and nationally into space, but also intentionally expand military forces. And we would almost certainly need to have some sort of renegotiation or international discussion on what that would look like and what the appropriate limitations are for those, so that we don't unilaterally do something that will be seen as provocative, ideally. Although I would also point out that both Russia and China are particularly good at lawfare, which is the use of legal and organizational means to accomplish your objectives. So, for instance, if I don't want the United States to put weapons in space, if I can get the international court to say no weapons in space, well, the United States will most likely agree with, abide by that. China and Russia, of course, probably won't, based on my analysis. So, or are they fairly contemporary concerns? So, I'm definitely very radical for the space and science and disarmament and space as a sanctuary. I think space as a sanctuary is very quickly going by the wayside. There's no way you can maintain that argument in the current climate, in my estimation. Brown water, the fact that I do agree that we do need to have space capabilities in orbit and be able to support the warfighter, absolutely. But I am still radical in the sense that I also would posit that you need a significant amount of resources, maybe not even the majority based on amount of costs and all of that, but we need to start investing in beyond Earth, in cislunar and lunar, and beyond eventually, but cislunar and lunar for now, to begin that expansion and eventually attempt to accelerate the exploitation. Because the nation that has the marketplace of cislunar and lunar built around them will be, of course, the central pillar of that new economic model, that new economic system. I'm sure you appreciate that.
It makes sense.
We need to lead in that, in my estimation, or we will be left behind. China would be more than happy to have that built around them. They're actively trying to compete with us with
How's your
Baidu and
Mandarin?
other stuff. Say again?
How's your Mandarin?
Not very good, so I intend to win this one.
I know a little bit. Mei Mei is one of the, but that's from Serenity.
It's about the only thing I know, which is thank you.
Okay. So we got a couple more here. If you don't mind entertaining us, Mr. Okay.
Possible.
Yeah.
What else you got, David?
Oh, he's also answering the question about the magnetic fields.
Yes,
and then,
exactly. They're cooler, right?
Splash Autumn.
Hey, Splash. Welcome back.
Why space development has to be a race or competition? Shouldn't all countries unite and work together for space exploration, since we're all learning and discovering new ideas, knowledge for
Boy, that
humanity?
sounds so nice.
Yeah.
Sounds so optimistic.
If only.
So space development is built on historical examples, Splash. And so why is space development a race or a competition? It does not intrinsically have to be. I do state, I have focused very much on competition because I consider that we are in a phase of strategic competition. I think it's absolutely essential that we have that mindset. However, it doesn't have to be. As I mentioned, ideally, the allies that go with us, ideally, that would include India, Brazil, Japan, South Korea, among others, the EU, and whoever else. I'm sure that's not an exhaustive list. That just is the ones that come to mind immediately. Ideally, we would be able to all go to space, all benefit, and everyone would be able to sing Kumbaya. But unfortunately, even in alliance relationships, these are not always friendly. For instance, it was Suez, I want to say the 1950s, England and France attempted to seize the Suez when Egypt took it over after Egypt had gained independence. And the British and the French were planning on, I think they were going to send, if I remember correctly, they either sent or were going to send, like the British were going to send paratroopers, the French was going to send the Foreign Legion.
Wow.
And America stepped in. We were their ally and said, nope, not going to do that. We're not cool with that. And of course, England and France were both very pissed about this because this is their asset that they are being told stand down from. And so even allies don't always have warm, positive relationships when our interests diverge. Our interests, national interests, do not always align. And if they do not align, they will not work together. That is quite honestly the simple end of that.
Yeah, we just recently pissed off the French by selling nuclear subs to the Australians.
Oh,
well, yeah, that's another great example. The French are not particularly happy with us from what it looks like. Hopefully the Australians are.
We have a very different ideology from other parts of the world, being, all about a republic and freedom and all that. Well, we're going away, but
that's true as well. And I was getting to, allies don't always get along. Much less strategic competitors. China sees themselves as the next world power. America sees themselves as the current world power. Russia sees themselves as the erstwhile and hopefully again world power. And that's not even to mention EU and, like I said, a bunch of other nations that would consider themselves in the running for a great power, not necessarily a superpower, but still a nation that can reap significant benefits from their position in the world, their relative position in the world. The only way I believe you would ever have a perfectly united world where everyone worked together is if you mind controlled everyone, quite honestly.
Or aliens. If aliens came, that might unite us. It might galvanize us as humans to, and we're not letting that happen here.
Well, and there's actually some interesting theories about that. Would you have a nation or two attempt to engage in relations with the aliens in exchange for benefit over the rest of the world system? There is historical examples where some groups, when a technologically superior group came in, the multiple inferior groups, some of the inferior groups said, hey, we can be beneficial to you and we will give you resources you desire, but give us some of your technology.
Yes.
And they benefited from that. It was a mutually beneficial relationship.
We will rule
Obviously,
the world.
though, not uniting everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I think we have one more, and you have some announcements too. Let's not forget those.
Okay, so, Kishore.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're here.
David.
I didn't bring it up. If I could.
Sorry. Tell us your announcements, Josh.
Yes.
That was so exciting.
That's a good time. The problem is, yes, we do need to probably be done at some point. So,
I know it's late there.
Yes. If it's okay, let me finish. I think we got through exploitation fairly well. Let me just go to exclusion and finish that up, and then I'll make the announcements.
Okay.
So exploitation is economic. Every nation wants to stay in exploitation because that's where you get maximal benefit. But if that is threatened, or if there's a previously occupied area that nation desires and they feel they can grab it for whatever purpose, then they will engage in exclusion, which is the broad term that I use to cover everything from information operations, trade embargoes, United Nations legal actions, all the way up to and including full armed conflict. Ideally, though, short of that. And then exclusion uses all the tools of national power. It's not a purely militaristic look. It, like I said, it can involve just about anything, and takes quite a bit from both the warfare styles that Russia and China are currently engaged in. And then once the exclusion, whichever nation wins, assuming there is a winner, then it goes back, but that nation attempts to go back to exploitation with the region now.
And exclusion is a spectrum too, from exclusion from the best places to exclusion from any places in order to make sure that someone else doesn't get any.
And yes, actually, that's a good point. The scope of the area of the exclusion can vary significantly. I could exclude you from one ice deposit, or I could exclude you from the whole moon, in theory. Or I could exclude you from all of space, in theory. Although that would be a pretty extreme exclusion, and that's not what I would envision. But
yeah, very expensive, I should think. 6 months, 1 year.
So microgravity does really bad things to your body, and basically, I mean the I don't know if they have anything equivalent in India. We have a saying here: use it or lose it. Yeah. What that means is that whatever is not utilized will be lost, whether that's mental faculties, strength, endurance, etc. And because astronauts stay in microgravity for an extended period of time, where very little strain is put on their bodies, they can suffer significant degradation in health if they don't exercise.
Yeah. Both bone and muscle mass.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah. Thank you, Kishore.
Oh, and David.
Yes, great. This has been fascinating. I mean, we could probably go on for a while longer, but
I'm getting warmed up. I've hit that midnight hump, and I'm still going.
Right, so, second win. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, second. Yes, exactly. Announcements. So
announcements. Yay.
So obviously, Spacepower Ascendant. I have the paperback. I also have an audiobook version, and I'm looking at expanding that also to include a hardcover version that'll have full color illustrations, which I think will be really beautiful. That's hopefully going to be out mid to late November, assuming the proof goes well.
Good. Congratulations. That's a big deal.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I really appreciate it. It's been very exciting. And then the other one, we had an initial announcement today, and unfortunately I can't talk too much about it because we have a lot we're still working on. But we have a game in development based on Spacepower Ascendant, and it will allow the player to play through the war games and beyond, potentially, that are mentioned in the book. And I don't know if we have a screenshot. If we don't, that's fine.
I didn't get it. I didn't have.
It's a pity.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. So it looks amazing.
Sorry.
And, it's just in the MVP form at the moment.
Hang on a second. I might be able to get it up there.
Jeff's gonna take a look.
Yeah, but so the video game, like I said, it's just in the very beginning phases. We're planning on eventually putting it on phone and iPad and allow people to play it.
Cool.
But you'll be able to like I said, play through the scenarios that we have, both to be the first to expand and then competing in a strategic sense with other nations to see how that shapes up.
So once again, here's the book. There's the link. I did put it in the chat. The website. If you want to know more about Josh and what he's doing, take a look.
I'm sorry.
Right.
One more announcement. I remember there was one more thing. So as
cool.
I was originally gonna focus on China for an extended period. If we could put up the link for Polymatter, the video on YouTube.
Right here.
So anyone who wants to know more about China and what is really going on, I would highly recommend this series. I'll give you a really quick synopsis, like 30-second, if that's okay. And then we can go on. So Polymatter, China's Reckoning. So it looks at 3 weaknesses in China, and then it ties them together for a 4th. The 3 weaknesses are demographics, which I think is huge and can probably not be overstated, the importance of it, which is one of the reasons I actually would consider China a major threat, but not an impossible one. Water and the limited water that China has and the pollution of water that China has in their water table. And then third is the real estate market, which is very relevant considering the recent Evergrande issue, the second largest developer of real estate in China. I think hasn't made a payment since September. They've defaulted 2 or 3 times. I lost track in the last week with everything else going on, but like in the tens of millions of dollars, they have not been paying back on their loans. And that's significant. But then it ties it all together and it points out that kind of what we were hinting at, the internal instability of China. China is not a unified country, not in an economic sense at all. And so they have to constantly deal with internal dissent. A lot of people point to China's military spending, and they certainly spend quite a bit on their military, but they actually spend more on their internal security because they are terrified of an internal uprising, which is why they've made such a strong police state. And the undercutting of all of these other issues, that's why they can't address those issues openly and potentially solve them, some of them relatively easily, because that would threaten the thing they really care about, which is internal stability and support of the people. Interesting.
All right.
So Polymatter, China's Reckoning. I would recommend checking it out.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. There it is again. And you know what? We could certainly get you back at some point because I'm sure you could keep going and talk about.
Yep.
Absolutely. We've only touched on the beginnings of space development theory, and we've mentioned China a couple of times.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Did you have another one? Is that what you?
A couple more for.
Oh wow.
Thank you for the answer. And then Jeff and myself are commerce graduates. You might be surprised to know that I'm asking questions about space.
Well, it's a space show. I'm not surprised.
I'm very much interested about astronomy. Well, hey, that's where I come from.
No, and also the fact you shared commerce is actually hugely important because space commerce is a burgeoning field, and we need people with commerce backgrounds who know space to be able to help with that exploitation.
Yeah, we had a guy. Space is open for business. Robert Jacobson, I think is his last name. Early on. So yeah, We get all kinds of people here. So let me go ahead and talk about some stellar events this week. And we're talking about October 29th through the November the 5th. And just so you know, Globe at Night, there's the link is still going on. They have 10 days. This is from October 27th to November 5th, where you go outside, you take a picture of a specific target. They have actually talked about Grus in the southern hemisphere and the Perseus in the northern hemisphere. David, David and Cliff, have you seen Grus? I'm really curious about that. And so what you do is you take your picture and you compare it to, they have 6 panels. And so it kind of tells you how many, how dark your site is. So they want to try and get like worldwide understanding of the sky, how it looks in your area, basically. So that's going to go through November 5th. The November 3rd, Mercury and the Moon are in conjunction. Also, it's the weekly Space Hangout, and Dr. Adam Dipert is back on that show, and he's going to be talking about juggling in space too, and that was facilitated by us. We helped Dr. Dipert get on their show as well. November 4th is the new moon. Also, Mars and the Moon are in conjunction. And Uranus is at opposition. That is one of the best times. Oppositions is one of the best times to take a picture of another celestial body. And then we're back to November 5th. It's our Friday night show. We'll talk about that in a little bit more in a minute. But we're here on Fridays at 9 p.m. Pacific time on the Everyday Spacer Facebook page and the Everyday Spacer YouTube channel. That night also is the Southern Toroids meteor shower peak. It's going to be after midnight, and the moon being 1 day old will not interfere with this. The range for these meteors is September 17th through November 27th. The source of these is the comet, and I just learned Wednesday it's one thing. I thought there were 2. It's called 2P/Encke. So that is the single comet. As we go through the comet's tail, we get this meteor shower effect. It is kind of low, though. Its rate is 5 per hour. And they seem to appear from Taurus, that kind of thing. And I found something I thought was kind of interesting. And they say, although it's called the Southern Taurids, it doesn't mean that the meteor showers for the Southern Hemisphere. It just means that it is more south of the 2 meteor showers. The related meteor shower is the Northern Taurids, which occurs at the same time. Both meteor showers have different sources, but are roughly located in the same part of the night sky. You're up.
Yep. We should hit 100 lives soon, November 5th, if our math is right.
Yeah, calculated.
Yeah. So if you or someone you know has done something interesting involving space exploration, science, or astronomy, we'd love to share our live. Join us again next Friday, November 5th, and help us welcome our next guest, Daniel Klopp. He's the Director of Marketing and Business Development for Space Systems. They made the Apollo spacesuits and are looking to make the spacesuits to come.
Yeah, he told us about that, and it sounds very, very interesting. We do have several people lined up. Of course, Daniel is on Friday, November the 5th. Dr. Adam Dipert is back on November the 19th. He will talk to us not about space juggling this time, but he's going to tell us about his helium-3 experiment. I can't wait. And I just got in touch with some folks, Chris and Shane from the Actual Astronomy podcast. They said they can join us on November the 26th. I know here in the United States, that's the day after Thanksgiving. I was thinking we'll get out and say happy holidays. However, we have guests. So we'll have guests on Friday the 26th. And we have about 10 other people lined up. We just have to get dates for them. I won't go through the names again tonight because it's getting late. Thanks so much, Josh, for being here. And thank you for all the great folks, Kishore and David and Cliff and Splash Autumn. And we had Christina and we had Michael. And did I say Cliff? I think I said Cliff, right? So just looking through them. Awesome. Thanks so much for all your questions and participation. We really, really appreciate that. So have a great week.
Yep.
And we'll see you again next time. Good night.